I'm telling you to leave. You woman who can only give birth to girls. The one glaring at me with utter contempt was my husband, Jake. I instinctively rubbed my belly. I had borne 3 daughters through this belly, in pain, for Jake. But what Jake really wanted was a son. I still remember how after giving birth to our eldest and then our second daughter, he said, "Next time it will be a boy." When our third daughter was born, Jake even left the naming all up to me. Ah, is this finally heading to divorce? I felt like sighing. With a faint smile, my husband assured me not to worry about a successor. There's already someone else who can bear him a son. I'm Susan, a full-time homemaker. And I just turned 40. I live with my husband, Jake, and our 3 daughters. It's been 3 years since I gave birth to our third daughter. This month, I've decided to quit being a homemaker to go to work. It's because, on Jake's salary alone, we couldn't afford to provide lessons for our 2 older daughters. I decided to work for the sake of our 3 children. Fortunately, I found a job quickly, and now I'm managing to cover our household expenses while working. Lately, Jake's been griping more and more about how his folks are getting on in years, and that I should be the one to take care of them. Would be a big help if you could quit your job to look after my parents, Susan. That's out of the question right now. Why? We can live comfortably enough on just my salary if we don't splurge. Splurge? I've never done that. I'm working because your paycheck alone won't cover extracurriculars for the kids. They don't need any extracurriculars. It's perfectly fine if they don't learn anything extra. This is the kind of nagging I always get from Jake. That's why I've learned to just brush it off whenever he brings it up. Are you even listening, Susan? I hear you. I'll do what I can to help out. Honestly, I can't stand my in-laws. I genuinely don't want to help with their care. But Jake and I live near his parents' place. It was his idea to start our married life in an apartment close to them. At the time, I didn't know their true colors and thought it'd be convenient for me, too, saying naively that it would be helpful. But it didn't take long to see their true nature. About 6 months into our marriage, my mother-in-law asked me to help clear space for a big table she bought so we could all gather anytime. That's when I started helping out at their house. I found myself constantly bossed around by my in-laws, being told where to put things, to tidy up, to serve tea, like some kind of servant. Being newly married, I couldn't handle it well and just kept helping as they told me to. Because of that, each time I visited their house, they treated me worse and worse. Every visit, I was like a little maid, having to listen to the in-laws boast about the old days or complain about their struggles for what felt like hours. And then, they'd end up meddling in our private life, pressing us to quickly produce a male heir. Even my husband, who said he wanted kids, would say things like, "Of course, I'd prefer a boy. Actually, if it's not a boy, there's no point in having one." When I was pregnant, all that those 3 cared about was the baby's gender. When they found out our first child was a girl, they insulted me and said things like, "Well, there's a saying, first a girl, then a boy. She'll be handy to have around." When the second and third turned out to be girls too, the in-laws openly lost interest in them. They'd just keep saying, "Next time, make sure it's a boy." Why is this house such a mess? There's no rowdy boys running around, and still, you use being busy as an excuse. Can't you even clean properly? Maybe it's your laziness, that's why you can't have a boy. All these girls and all they'll do is get married off elsewhere. They can't be successors. You should be taking care of us, the heads of the family, instead of wasting time on girls who are no use as heirs. To think these are their own grandkids they're talking about. I never invited them in the first place, and I sure as heck don't want to go to their place. Being dragged to their house and treated like this is more than I can stand. I've told Jake countless times that I want to keep our distance from his parents, but it's like talking to a wall. The house being a mess is a fact. Girls are supposed to play quietly and read books, right? Instead, they just scatter their stuff everywhere. If you can't manage housework and childcare, which are supposed to be a woman's job, then it's no wonder you're being criticized. How can you say that when we're both working to raise our 2 kids? It's impossible for housework and childcare to be only my responsibility. If working is your excuse, then just quit and be a stay-at-home mom. If you can't do that, then what my mother's saying is right. You think you can support me and our 3 daughters on your salary alone? That's why I'm working, too. It gives me a headache just thinking about it. Sure, there was a time when men worked and women took care of the home and kids. But those days are long gone. Now it's normal for wives to work, too. But to accept the changing times while still insisting that housework and childcare are solely a wife's responsibilities is just too convenient. No matter how much I try to convince him, Jake just won't change. Mom's right. It must be as Dad says. Every time I heard these words, thoughts of divorce crossed my mind. But my daughters, oblivious to everything, were fond of Jake. Only the eldest, a middle schooler, seemed to have some reservations about Jake. Being in the throes of adolescence, she didn't seem to be very interactive with Jake. Yet, whenever I saw the third girl innocently laughing and clamoring to be held by Jake, calling him Daddy, Daddy, I couldn't bring myself to go through with a divorce. 3 months had passed since then. For some reason, Jake started coming home late more frequently. I was suspicious and asked him when he returned home. Jake, you've been quite late recently. Is something up at work? No, it just happened today. A junior messed up, and I had to cover some overtime. Don't worry about it. At first, I believed his words, but he began to come home late more often, and I asked again. Then Jake started making excuses like he was held up at work entertaining clients, or meetings with partners ran long. Even as I started to suspect Jake's words and actions, I couldn't muster the courage to take that step away because I didn't want to deprive my children of their beloved father. I started to pretend not to care about Jake's late returns. Half a year had gone by in this way. A colleague I worked with mentioned seeing Jake walking in the downtown area with a young woman. I dismissed it to her, saying Jake was at work, but she insisted she wasn't mistaken. Our families are close, often going camping or having barbecues together on holidays, and my daughters are around the same age as hers. Jake and she always got along well whenever they met. So I knew she couldn't have mistaken someone else for Jake. But even knowing this, my desire to trust Jake was stronger, and her suggestion to approach him next time made my heart skip a beat. I told her I'd talk to Jake about it, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. I went to see a private investigator immediately after work and requested a surveillance operation. 5 days later, the investigator got back to me, saying it had been quite straightforward. When I met the investigator after work, I was presented with substantial evidence. There were several photos of Jake entering a hotel with another woman, and the results were incriminating. I decided to confront Jake about the affair as soon as I got home. Though he had gotten home before me, he was just looking at his phone in the living room. I saw my eldest daughter take her younger sisters to her room. And while I felt sorry, I couldn't keep it to myself. Jake, can you explain this to me? You said you were working overtime or entertaining, but is entertaining clients at a hotel part of the job? Jake didn't respond to my words and just started making a phone call with a cold expression. For some reason, Jake remained silent, determined not to speak. So your silence means you admit it's true? It's none of your business. You really think a husband's affair is none of his wife's business? It's none of your business. No matter how many times I asked, Jake only repeated that it was none of my business. Then, suddenly, the doorbell rang. While I was thinking of pretending we weren't home, Jake quickly went to open the door. In came my in-laws and the woman from the investigator's photos. What's going on? Did you call them here? I hadn't planned on telling the truth until everyone arrived. Well, now that everyone's here, explain these photos. I challenged Jake again with the photos. The girl there is pregnant with a boy. Our family has always needed a son to carry on the family line. I told you before we got married that we needed a son. But you kept having girls. So, you're no longer needed and should leave right away. Just when I thought Jake was starting to make sense, he handed me a divorce paper with an explanation that didn't make any sense.
Hold on, pregnant? How many affairs do you need to have for that to happen? Sure, I knew about the son issue, but we can't choose the gender of our babies. Besides, you always seem to love our daughters.
Susan, you've heard the story, but you're someone who could only have girls. Just leave this house quietly.
I'm sorry, but I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my husband, Jake. What's going on?
As I pressed Jake for answers, my in-laws interjected.
That's enough. We're finally having the boy we always wanted. It's best for you, who couldn't do anything, to leave. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to you, Jake. So why do both of you come barging in? Don't try to change the subject.
At my words, my husband lets out a heavy sigh. Enough already. There's no need to discuss this. All Susan has to do is leave this house quietly.
What are you saying? We have 3 daughters. And you know as well as I do that it's impossible for me to support all 3 with my current income, right, Jake?
That's none of my business. You're the one who wanted to have 3 girls. Just get out already.
Don't be ridiculous. What do you mean, wanted? You used to dote on all 3 of them too, didn't you, Jake? Why would you say something like this all of a sudden?
I thought my husband would say something in response to my words, but it was his mistress who retorted. Oh, this is why dealing with an older woman is such a hassle. When you're told to leave, you should just leave gracefully.
What are you even doing here? It's because of you showing up that our family is in this mess.
Mess? Don't you mean it's your fault for not being able to have a boy? The mistress sneers at me with a snort. I painfully realize that I've expected too much from my husband. We have 3 kids, and our youngest adores her dad, so I wanted to believe that divorce isn't the only right answer. I thought he would think of the children when faced with the evidence. Even if he didn't have a change of heart and we couldn't be a happy family, I believed he would at least act the part of a good father in front of the kids. But in reality, he shamelessly brings home not just his parents but even his mistress.
I understand. I'll file for divorce.
I was too naive. That's what I realize as I stand up to pack my things. I had thoughts about the mistress, smirking as she watched, but I didn't care anymore. I snatched the divorce papers from my husband and signed them. I write my name as the guardian for our daughters.
I'm taking custody of all 3 girls. I'll be filing for alimony and child support later. I'm leaving now, but I'll come back for the things I can't take with me today.
Do whatever you want. My in-laws, who usually make snide remarks, listened to our conversation with dissatisfied expressions. It seems they've left this discussion up to my husband. Knowing this, my husband confidently tells me off. Feeling the tense atmosphere, I hug my eldest daughter, who has been cautiously observing from the room. Maybe she understood just from that because she immediately started packing her things. The middle and youngest daughters, thinking they are going on an outing, cheerfully prepare their to-go bags. Even as we gather our bare essentials and head for the front door, no one comes out from the living room. The middle and youngest daughters look puzzled, but when they wave goodbye cheerfully, they leave the house in high spirits. I call my parents' house. I haven't been home much since I moved far away after getting married. Despite the sudden call, my mother tells me to come back as soon as I can. They offer to pick us up, so we decide to stay in a hotel for the night. There, without telling my daughters about their father's affair, I explain, Daddy and Mommy are just heading down different paths now. The younger two, who love idols, recall a recently disbanded group who had said the same thing. Does that mean we can't be together anymore? It seems my eldest understands what I'm saying. I return to my parents' home with my daughters, and we are swamped with changing our family registry and various other legal and administrative processes. And before I know it, 2 months have passed, and I successfully received alimony and child support from my husband and his mistress. I had filed for compensation for the affair against both, and additionally for child support from my husband. Not wanting to see their faces ever again, I conducted everything through a lawyer. It cost money, but it was worth it to avoid the stress. The lawyer's visit to my in-laws to discuss alimony and child support was met with their silent bitterness, like they were swallowing a bitter pill. Nevertheless, my husband had an affair and even got another woman pregnant, which looks bad to outsiders. To prevent more complications, both my husband and my in-laws hastily gathered the funds for payment. It seems they even covered the mistress's portion of the alimony. Another 3 months go by. While we can't afford luxuries, my parents have supported us, and the 6 of us have been able to start living a peaceful life together. I was just beginning to get used to life without my husband, as were our daughters. On his day off, my husband suddenly called me. When I ignored him, the phone kept ringing over and over. I thought it would be trouble if it kept ringing until our daughters returned from their lessons, so I reluctantly decided to answer my husband's call. "Good, you finally picked up. What do you want all of a sudden?" "Well, you see, the woman I cheated with just gave birth." "What am I supposed to say to that?" I was about to hang up coldly when my husband suddenly raised his voice.
"The legs! I mean the crotch!"
According to my husband, the child that his mistress had given birth to was a girl. Moreover, it wasn't a case of a mix-up during the ultrasound. The doctors had been saying it was a girl from the start. The mistress had lied about the baby's sex because she wanted to marry my husband, who apparently would have considered divorce if it weren't a boy, but his parents put a stop to that. They were worried about not having any grandchildren if things continued as they were, so my husband called off the divorce. He was supposed to be thinking about having another child right away, but his life was in shambles, and he couldn't focus on that. Right after the birth, she couldn't work and had no income. She'd refused to do housework perfectly because of child-rearing, and she flatly denied doing any caregiving for my in-laws. Of course, if you're living with a baby who may or may not have a steady head yet, it's going to be like that. It's tough to take care of household chores perfectly when you're desperate with a baby, and you don't have the physical strength or spare energy to take care of elderly parents. Yet, living with this new wife, my husband now told me he was thinking of divorce again. So, what do you want me to do about it? I responded coldly, and my husband said, "Susan, please, can't we start over?" "Huh? As if I have any intention of getting back together with you now." I lashed out at him.
"Don't talk like that. Despite having thorns like a rose, you're delicate and bloom beautifully, aren't you? I love that about you, Susan. Let's give it another try."
My husband was trying to hold me back with his poetic words. Those words gave me chills.
"Susan, are you listening? We've been together for a long time. Your feelings haven't changed just because we've been apart for a bit, have they?"
Perhaps I would have been moved by my husband's words of love if this were back when we were married, but after discovering his affair and getting a divorce, all I could feel was coldness. I just gave a bitter smile. "You're smiling, so that means you forgive me, right?" My husband happily misunderstood. "Huh? You're totally clueless." That was a bitter smile. "I'm not laughing, and I haven't forgiven you."
"Why do you have to say that? Susan, please consider getting back together. Haven't we always been doing well? You were happy with me, weren't you?"
"We were not doing well, that's why we fought so many times. I wasn't happy, that's why I divorced you. It was you who said you didn't need me."
"That's true, right? Then we can start over. It was me who suggested we break up, so I'm suggesting we start over. Let's do it."
My husband started spouting nonsense about wanting to reconcile. He even brought up old times, and honestly, I was fed up. But then, a thought struck me, and I changed the subject. "Oh, about Kate."
"Why do you know her name? She didn't introduce herself that time, did she?"
My husband sounded surprised when I mentioned the name of my remarriage partner. "Of course, I know. I heard it from the detective, and I even sent a certified mail for the alimony claim. And about her."
"What about Kate?"
"I was just wondering who she might be targeting next. She has a hobby of breaking up seemingly happy couples or married people,
and since you and I are divorced, I was wondering who the next target is.
My husband said nothing. Perhaps he was speechless, mouth agape. I proceeded to explain to my unresponsive husband what I knew about this woman named Kate. Kate had always been adorable since she was a child, always surrounded by various people. Her father, the company president, doted on her, and she was spoiled, always getting what she wanted. It's precisely because she could get anything she wanted that taking things from others became her hobby. As an adult, her targets became other people's boyfriends, fiancés, and husbands. Since taking things was her hobby, she would easily discard them once she managed to start a relationship. When I introduced her dating history, investigated by a detective, to Jake, he gasped in a strangled voice.
What the heck? Why bring this up now? If you told me this when we were getting divorced, I wouldn't be in this mess. Back then, all you said was get out. You never listened to my side of the story. So, I did as I was told and left. It's not like a woman who approaches a married man can be considered good-hearted.
Don't talk like that. Susan, it's so sneaky of you, making it sound like it's my fault. If you had just explained things properly back then, it would have been different. Jake, for some reason, started to speak in a defeated tone, playing the victim when he spoke to me. Angered by his words, I snapped at him.
What are you on about? You're the one in the wrong, not like, you are wrong. Why don't you just live however you want? I don't care anymore.
At my words, Jake suddenly spoke in a softer tone.
Susan, it's going to be tough raising 3 daughters all by yourself. Let me take at least one of them. If you let me take one, you'll have an easier time. Aren't 2 kids enough?
The cloying sweetness in his voice was so vile, it made my head spin. What in the world does he think of our daughters? I could never send them to live with such a man. Neither Jake nor his parents really want the girls because they love them. He kept saying any girl would do, or just one, talking about them as if they weren't people. I could only see a future where they would be preyed upon by Jake and his parents. I knew that as they grew up, they would receive the same terrible treatment I did. That's why I refused adamantly.
Don't be ridiculous. I will raise my daughters properly. Don't be like that. A child needs her father, don't you think?
Jake argued defiantly.
A father who can't even raise his kids properly, let alone cheats, has no right to custody.
I spoke firmly, to leave no room for misunderstanding.
Even so, it's up to the girls to decide if they want a father like that. They're too young to decide for themselves now, so I'll take responsibility and raise them.
Enraged, I conveyed my feelings and hung up the phone on Jake. I don't know if it was because I immediately blocked his number, but I never heard from him again. Months went by. It seems Jake and Kate's divorce went through without a hitch. Kate went back home with her newborn child. Apparently, the child's father is also married, and she is being sued for alimony not just by Jake but also by his actual wife. Strapped for cash, she seems to be working hard at raising her child with the support of her parents back home. Terrifyingly, she shows no signs of remorse. She is aware that what she's doing is wrong, and if caught, she pays alimony as a sign of her sincerity. However, it seems that the money is also being provided by her father, who is a company president, allowing her to live a carefree life. It appears that the reason Kate went after my husband was just a whim. With her natural beauty and status, she would freely take other women's boyfriends and married men, and she decided to target married men as her next conquest. It just so happened that Kate set her sights on Jake and me when she saw us in town. It was a complete nuisance to have our lives disrupted by her caprice. And the reason Kate decided to marry Jake, something she usually didn't bother with after taking a man, was because Jake was indecisive and indulgent towards her. It seems Kate wanted a man who would treat her like a princess, indulging her every whim and buying her whatever she desired. Now, I couldn't care less about it all. I was stunned by the sheer audacity of not just my easily swayed husband but also Kate, the woman he cheated with. My husband Jake was deceived by his affair partner, but he had the chance to refuse and didn't take the bait. No matter what stories I hear, the fact that Jake betrayed me won't just disappear. I also heard that Jake's family was ostracized by friends and relatives and had moved far away. They only stormed into my house once after the move. Susan, stop being stubborn and hand over one of the kids.
That's right, Susan. It's not good for a child to receive all the love from just one parent. We'll raise her together, the three of us.
Please stop.
I'm fine raising her on my own.
Thinking that my youngest daughter, who was still too young to understand, would be okay, the three of them came with a menacing look to take her away, and I resisted desperately.
You can't handle it, Susan. You can't raise her while working.
Hand her over, Susan. Poor thing. Don't worry. We'll raise her properly. No matter what I said, they wouldn't listen.
Stop! Don't take her! This is kidnapping!
My youngest daughter cried loudly, and I screamed just as loudly. Thanks to our cries, the nearby residents gathered and quickly restrained the three of them. After a while, the police arrived from a call and took the three away. I repeatedly thanked my neighbors, relieved that my daughter was safe. Later, the three of them received a restraining order. But I'm considering moving. Because a restraining order isn't enough to make me feel safe. Since they know where we live, it wouldn't be strange for them to show up at any time. I've discussed moving with my parents, who live with us, because I feel sorry for them too. They said they'd dispose of the house and move with us, as it would be a nuisance to be followed forever. Still, I feel guilty for changing my daughter's environment so often. Yet, seeing their smiling faces and healthy growth heals me. I've decided to move to a new place to protect them. Just before moving, I got a call from an unregistered number. Thinking it was the moving company or someone from the city office, I answered, only to find it was surprisingly Kate. Summing up her sobbing story, she had apparently gotten into trouble for being with too many men and had contracted a serious disease. I need money for treatment, so give me back the alimony, she cried, but I responded coldly.
Don't you have a wonderful dad who buys you everything? There's nothing I need to do for you.
Her audacity was too much, and without much of a response, I just hung up. I immediately blocked her and bought a new cell phone, so now she can't reach me anymore. I'm grateful to my parents for coming with me, and I'm determined to keep working hard for my daughter's healthy upbringing. At the airport, getting ready for our honeymoon, I pulled out the ticket holder from my bag, following my husband's instructions. That's when it happened. My husband snatched the plane ticket from my hand and threw these words at me.
You're not worth it. I should have gone with someone else.
He then ran towards another woman. Watching him, a secret smile crept onto my lips, and I took out my phone.
Well, time to go as planned.
My name is Michelle Anderson. Ever since I graduated from college, I've been working at a trading company in New York, now 30 years old. My husband of the same age, John, is a journalist registered with a publishing house. We met in the same college seminar. Back then, I wasn't particularly ambitious about my future job, but John, with his dreams, pursuing job opportunities, seemed radiant. He always said he wanted to be a reporter, chasing stories for newspapers or magazines. He definitely had a spark in him. Seeing each other often in the same seminar, our conversations grew more frequent over the course of 2 years. By the time graduation approached, I didn't want to part ways, so under his proactive approach, we started dating. We lived together for 3 years after graduation. Then, at 27, we made it official. However, we didn't have a wedding ceremony, reception, or even a honeymoon. Both our parents weren't thrilled about it, but while it was easy for me to get extended time off, John, who always prioritized his work, especially during incidents, couldn't do the same.
What about life's milestones? What if something happens to one of your family members all of a sudden? Would you say the same?
Even when I said that.
What are you talking about? Funerals are one thing, but weddings are a matter of personal choice. The stories I'm chasing right now can't wait.
I couldn't argue with that. After all, John's job was relentless, around the clock. I remember how ecstatic he was the year before we got married, as he finally got assigned to the editorial department of the weekly magazine he'd always wanted to work for. Now, he's busier than ever, working day and night. Well, not just now. Even before we lived together, his apartment was a mess, only coming home to sleep. One of the reasons we started living together was that I got tired of cleaning up his place every weekend. I was the one who chose and signed the lease for our new apartment. Except for sharing his preferences for location, rent, and size, he didn't do much else. We split the rent and living expenses. He sometimes forgot to pitch in. I took care of the cleaning and laundry. Even though we lived together, we rarely saw each other. The main reason for our official union was my desire to hold on to him, even if it was just a formality. For John, perhaps a wedding ceremony seemed unnecessary. But for me, even if it was just symbolic, I wanted a commemoration, a milestone. At the very least, I suggested we should take some photos and go on a short honeymoon nearby. But all I got in return was,
"Why just take pictures? If you want to go on a trip, why not go with your friends? I ain't got time for that."
Many of my college friends who were in the same seminar would say, "That's not right." But those who knew about his job often replied, "It can't be helped." 3 years have passed. We're now 30. Even though I want to discuss having children, John and I often have opposite schedules, making it hard to find the right moment. All I do is rush between work and household chores every day. I started wondering, why did we even get married? But then one day, John said this out of the blue.
"Hey Michelle, didn't you mention wanting to go on a honeymoon before?" "Yeah, but aren't you too busy?" "Nah, looks like I might get some decent time off. We can go if you want." "Really?" "I'll set the duration, you choose the rest."
His tone did bother me, but I still noted down the dates he mentioned. A week's time. And it's gonna be summer. So I thought maybe a cooler place would be good, so I considered going to Alaska. I went to the bookstore, picked up a few travel guides, marked places I wanted to visit, and showed them to John.
"Hey, can you look at this? I want to go here."
Before I could ask him where he wanted to go, he dismissed me with a wave of his hand.
You choose. I'm fine with anything."
Oh, okay. Something felt off to me then. Maybe it's unfair to expect much from John with his busy daily life. But this is supposed to be our honeymoon. Our very first milestone. I wanted to discuss and decide the destinations with him. Is it wrong for me to hope for that? Even though we've lived together for years, our lives barely intersect. When was the last time we had a meal together? I realized that we hardly ever spoke to each other. Even when I initiate a conversation, he often responds with phrases like, "Do whatever you want and I might let you handle it if you insist." Come to think of it, that's how he's been about chores as well. I remember John, back in college, saying something like this to everyone.
"In today's age, couples should both earn and equally share household chores. Splitting chores is just fair. You sure you can handle that? I can cook, at least."
I was quite impressed at the time. He wasn't wrong. Although he mostly eats out, occasionally he seems to cook for himself. I often find dishes I didn't use in the sink. But all other chores are on me. I always end up cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, taking out the trash, everything. Now, John rarely comes home at the same time I do. Once in a blue moon, we get to have dinner together, and it's a relief. But even then, he's constantly glancing at his phone on the table. Once dinner's over, he quickly moves to the living room, seemingly messaging someone on social media. All the while, I'm busy cleaning up. One day, slightly irritated by his indifference, I commented, "You seem awfully busy texting."
"Well, unlike you, I have work contacts to keep up with."
He probably wasn't wrong. By the way, he often leaves his smartphone unattended. Like when he's taking a bath or napping on the living room couch. It was by pure chance that I peeked into it. He was messaging a woman.
"Who is this person?"
At that moment, I shoved my smartphone screen in front of a groggy, just awakened John. The name on the screen read Anna Johnson. Multiple messages from John's side lined up, reading things like "Have you been, and you okay since then?"
Who? Oh, she's related to the case I'm currently working on. Is there a problem? You're texting someone related to the case every single day? Well, if I have questions, I've got to show some sincerity, right? But doesn't she seem annoyed by it? You have a problem with how I do my job?
I couldn't really argue when he brought up work.
But decide soon where we're going. I might not be back until the last minute because of the case I'm investigating. Pack our bags, will you?
Yes, that had just happened recently. And finally, the day of our trip arrived. John, who said he might not make it home in time, surprisingly woke up early and in high spirits. "Then, I'm gonna make breakfast," he said, placing a plate of toast, bacon and eggs, and a salad in front of me. I became suspicious when he also set down a pot of coffee, as it was so unlike him.
What's with that look? When I decide to do something, I do it.
Sure, it was just store-bought potato salad, undercooked bacon, and instant soup, but there was no need to make it seem so special. I kept those thoughts to myself and quietly ate.
Here, your luggage. Thanks, looks like you packed it well. Aren't you gonna check inside? I'll check later. If you say so.
We headed straight for the airport. By the way, our destination written on the tickets was Alaska. We had plans to travel around different parts of the state. We took the tram to the domestic terminal and headed for the boarding gate. As we were approaching, John suddenly stopped in his tracks.
Hey, have your boarding pass ready? I can get it out quickly.
As I began to pull out the ticket holder, he snatched the tickets from me, saying, "What a waste to travel with you. I should go with someone else." With that, he ran towards the boarding gate. There was a woman standing ahead. "That's Anna Johnson." He had a picture in his smartphone. "That's definitely her." I caught a glimpse of that, smirked discreetly, and took out my own smartphone.
Well, shall we head out as planned?
A few hours later, I was at the terminal building of an airport in Alaska. Headed straight for the domestic exit, right up to the famous pastry shop in the dessert corner on the second floor. I knew John and Anna were at the eat-in space there. I confidently walked in and approached the two of them who were enjoying an airport-exclusive sundae.
Found ya.
John, who had been gazing dreamily at Anna, suddenly paled, a bit of ice cream still on the corner of his mouth, looking at me as if he'd seen a ghost.
Wait. Why are you here, Michelle?
Anna jumped up and threw herself at me.
Michelle, I've been so scared.
I gently rubbed her trembling back, while giving John a stern look.
What do you mean, why am I here? Do you know how many flights from different airlines land there? I just took the earliest one. Are you really a journalist? Not even knowing something so basic. Ugh. Exactly. How can you not even realize that, John? What kind of journalist are you?
From behind me, a deep male voice slowly approached, making John look even more tense.
Why? Why is the editor here? Let's not make a scene here. Let's step outside.
The man called editor was Mr. Long, the chief editor of my husband's department. When we got married, he and his wife had invited us to dinner as a celebration. At that time, we exchanged numbers just in case. As the charismatic Mr. Long grabbed his arm, John shivered. Anna, walking beside me, intertwined her arm with mine, while John looked on, completely baffled. Every time he tried to get closer to Anna, Mr. Long would firmly hold back John's hand. We pretended not to notice as John clicked his tongue in annoyance.
It's less crowded over here.
We headed towards a special room on the third floor we had reserved earlier. A man already inside stood up and waved at us.
Hey, over here!
John's expression turned to shock and he stopped in his tracks.
Come on, why are you stopping? Wait, Michelle, why is my dad there? Well, you left me behind, so I just invited everyone. Why not make it a family trip? That's right. It's your fault for thinking you could go on a honeymoon with another woman.
Mr. Long started dragging John.
It's okay.
I whispered to Anna, and she nodded.
Sorry for the wait, mother and father-in-law. We've managed to capture John. Capture? Exactly, a man who thinks of going on a honeymoon with another woman should be captured, don't you think? Even you, Mom? And you used Michelle's money for all this, didn't you? Father-in-law?
Yes, it wasn't just the in-laws. My parents were there too. And another man, in a suit with glasses.
So, is this the young lady in question? Who are you? Sorry for the late introduction. I am.
He handed a business card to John.
A lawyer? Why?
In fact, I received a request from both Michelle and Anna here, John said.
Michelle did? Wait, more importantly, Anna, why on earth?
John reached out to her as he said this. However, his hand missed as Anna dodged it.
Stop it. Anna? I'm sorry, Anna. I managed to get her out here with your help, but it seems that was my limit. No, I'm sorry. If this settles everything. Settles? What are you talking about? You've been following Anna around for a while, haven't you? You're saying I've been stalking her? Is that not the case? It's not. I spoke to Anna about the incident that happened the other day. So after that was over, you kept in touch even though the article was done? For stories like this, you're supposed to keep in touch with the people involved.
Mr. Long slapped John on the head from above.
I apologize, Ms. Johnson. I told him not to publish any more articles about the incident you were involved in. Yes, I thought so. Look at the messages this man has been sending me.
The lawyer handed out printouts of the messages to everyone.
What is this? Thank you for your cooperation. Would you like to grab dinner sometime? And you kept inviting her long after she declined. I mean, it's just common courtesy. I was drawn to your brave attitude. What's this about? She truly was brave. Despite the incident, she tried so hard to recover. John.
The voice of John's father-in-law boomed.
What on earth are you saying? Drawn to her? Ms. Johnson, I won't ask about what happened, but I know you were hurt. Yet, it seems this fool kept reminding you of it when you were trying to forget.
Anna nodded with tears in her eyes. I only cooperated because he promised to write properly about the incident. Yet, he kept coming up with reasons to ask me out afterward. And the volume of messages too. And he knows where I live.
That's right. There's also this.
The lawyer handed out several pictures. They showed John with a camera next to a window of a 2-story apartment complex. It's the apartment I live in.
You were up to this?
Hearing that, Anna shivered again.
I've made up my mind.
I'm gonna report him for stalking.
What are you talking about?
Anna began to speak as if a dam had broken.
Every single day, he asks, "What are you doing? Can we meet tomorrow?" Even though he's heard about the incident, he persists even after I tell him there's nothing more to discuss. But you replied to my texts, didn't you? Who do you think is enjoying this conversation? Exactly. Thanks for today, how've you been? Yeah. You know what's good when you're tired? A massage. I'll come over and give you one sometime. I'm busy now. Stuff like that. And what's with the creepy "are you in the bath" messages?
I chuckled as I flipped through the thick printout.
Yes, I really appreciate everything Michelle did. She advised me to keep records of everything. Oh, come on. It must have been scary, right? To deal with someone spouting nonsense like that. It was terrifying.
Anna shivered.
How could you think from those messages that I was into you? It was just plain creepy. But about our trip. It was a final blow for you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bothered with this terrifying plan. Terrifying plan? You still don't get it?
I sighed deeply.
That was my name on it, right? Huh?
He probably realized it was about the airline ticket. Oh, right, it was. What about it? Mr. Long spoke in a hushed tone.
You know, if that's found, it's a crime. Exactly. And if someone gets caught, it won't be you. It's her.
He gasped. He truly seemed unaware. Mr. Long put his head in his hands. I can't believe how stupid my subordinate has been.
You too? Shut up. You're gonna use this to fly to the Philippines.
With that, Mr. Long shoved the ticket in John's face.
What? Why? There are various matters to investigate over there now. You can refuse if you want, but if you do.
Mr. Long turned to Anna.
Yes. If you decide to stay in the country, I'll report you to the police for stalking. I get it. But I don't have my luggage, my passport. The passport. Here.
It was my turn to hand it over to him.
Oh, right. There's something important. Sign this before you go.
I handed him the divorce papers with my signature.
Divorce papers? Are you abandoning me too? Oh, what are you saying to the wife who went to such lengths to prevent you from getting a criminal record? I'm the one who runs our home.
I laughed dramatically. But then I changed my expression.
Do you have any idea how much of a proper married life we had in that house? We hardly ever saw each other. Both working full-time, and yet all the housework falls on me. Plus, you haven't been contributing to our shared living expenses or rent recently. Really? I get paid just fine from my job. I know. I've looked into what you've been spending it on. Like those high-end cameras at this apartment. Just sign it.
Seeing my fury, his face turned pale as a ghost. He shakily signed the papers and handed them back.
All right, the rest is up to you.
Sorry for everything, said Mr. Long as he escorted John towards the international flight counter. We chose to settle on the third floor instead of the spacious lounge on the second floor. Why? Because the third floor of this airport is where the international terminal is located. The plan was to easily get him on a flight to Manila. As for what happens to him next, that's none of our business. After that, I moved from the condo I had been living in to a small apartment meant for living alone. The number of rooms decreased, and there's nothing unrelated to me. No more buying groceries for someone who I don't know when they'll be back. How easy house chores are when it's just for myself. I realized just how much unnecessary struggle I've been through while living with John. The moving expenses were covered by my father-in-law. He also settled the living expenses and rent John forgot to pay. My in-laws, lamenting that they raised their son wrong, were such kind folks. About a month later, I got a call from Mr. Long. Apparently, John got caught up in some trouble overseas and got arrested. Was it some kind of crime?
I really don't know. Our editorial department didn't ask him to get involved in any crimes or anything. Just told him to send daily updates on the situation over there. Well, I've heard various stories like he got deceived or got addicted to gambling. Told him if he could get a big scoop, we might let him return.
Seems like John got too ambitious and ruined himself, Mr. Long indirectly implied to me. Since then, I haven't heard any rumors of him coming back.
Michelle, over here.
At the cafe we had arranged to meet, Anna signaled me. I quickly approached her table.
Sorry for the wait. All set? Absolutely. How about you, Michelle? Look.
I showed her the fan merchandise for the concert we were going to. We shared a cheerful smile, had a quick coffee, and then headed for the venue. During the time I was communicating about John's issue, I found out that Anna and I were fans of the same musician and we hit it off. We had promised to attend a concert together once everything was settled. Today was the long-awaited day. After getting married, I had forgotten such joys amidst the conflicting schedules with John. Now, I can spend time just for myself, with friends sharing the same hobby. Oh, I'm truly glad I made that decision back then. It all happened when we were sitting at the reception desk at our wedding. I've come here to get my compensation for the affair. Huh? Both John and I were literally dumbfounded. But what surprised me even more was the fact that John had indeed cheated.
Damn. I thought I'd never get caught.
And he was justifying it, making it impossible to have a proper conversation.
Do you really think you have any appeal as a woman? I married you because you can cook well and you have a body that looks like it can bear healthy children. Stop kidding around!
I had reached my limit and slapped John right across the face. Until now, no matter how rude John was, I had always got through it with a smile and a joke. But this time, I couldn't let it slide. I swore to myself that I wouldn't be satisfied until I had cornered him. On the long-awaited morning of our wedding, I was in the dressing room, wrapped in a pure white dress, secretly hoping that John would tell me, "Lily, you look beautiful." John had been high-spirited since the day before, genuinely looking forward to the wedding. I thought he would be pleased to see me looking different. In fact, I looked better than usual in the mirror, and both my parents and my in-laws praised me. I'm a bit on the chubby side and usually dress plainly. But today, I thought I should be allowed to enjoy being the star of the show. John and I are from the same university. When I was a freshman, he was a senior. I was a member of the broadcasting club, and that's how I met John, who was the captain of the sports team and a well-known figure on campus. Our relationship developed smoothly, and we submitted our marriage registration before our wedding, and we've been living together for the past 3 months. Living together made the wedding preparations more efficient. The wedding venue was about a 10-minute train ride from our house. It was a casual restaurant without any formality. The beautiful and stylish interior made it very popular for private parties. John entered the dressing room. I suppressed my excitement and asked, "Does the dress suit me?" Immediately, John broke into a wide smile and stroked my head. "You've still got a round belly, haven't you? Hope you'll give birth to a healthy baby." I was utterly dumbfounded. Even our parents frowned. "At least don't say that today." "Why?" "It's the truth. I even went on a diet to fit into this dress for the wedding, you know?" I forced a smile and patted my belly. In such moments, I feel bad inside, but I always try to brush it off with a joke. One of John's shortcomings is that once he gets too carried away, he can't stop himself. He was teasing and said, "Hey, your belly looks like a balloon." The bride is supposed to be the most beautiful woman on her wedding day. Stop it before you hurt Lily's feelings. John pretended not to know what he had done wrong, saying, "Well, a fat person is a fat person. I'm sorry for our son, he's always been childish. Even though you are younger, you are much more mature." There was no blame for my mother-in-law. "I don't mind. It's just his usual self." I flashed a grin and laid on the sarcasm as thick as I could. The two of us quickly pulled ourselves together and took our seats at the reception desk. We wanted a homey wedding and decided to greet the guests personally, bride and groom both. Sadly, most of my friends live on a distant island, where my parents' home is, so they couldn't make it. On the flip side, John had a lot of acquaintances attending. We were okay with the imbalance. My parents and I had made our peace with it. I saw this as a golden opportunity to meet many of John's friends and was actually looking forward to the greetings. John introduced each guest to me, one by one. Every single one of them seemed delighted to meet me, complimenting me with a "You look like a beautiful bride." There was one guest, in particular, that stood out, a woman named Natasha. She was an acquaintance from work, as I understood. She seemed to be in her 40s, but she had this actress-like aura, especially in her dress and her tall, slender figure. "Nice to meet you, Lily. I've always been under John's care," she greeted me. "Oh, is that so?" I was certainly overwhelmed by Natasha. "He's a looker, right? And she's got her stuff together at work. Quite a different story from someone else I know." She indeed had the aura of someone who's competent at her job. Her designer suit fitted her perfectly without being too flashy, and her makeup was flawless. John was looking at Natasha with a kind of admiration in his eyes that he never showed to me, and Natasha was gracefully accepting his attention. They exchanged words for quite a while. Right now, I'm a full-time housewife. But originally, I left my job because of John's wishes. He insisted that he wanted me to focus on our home. I had only been at my job for 2 years. Just when things were starting to get interesting, I felt pressured to resign. When I think about the unfinished business at my old job, I still feel a tug at my heartstrings. Looking at Natasha, who seemed so dazzling, made these feelings even stronger. This is wrong. Today's supposed to be about us. Our guests should leave having had a good time. I swallowed the anger rising inside me due to John's insensitive remark and kept up with the greetings. Then, a middle-aged man in a suit appeared. He had this impressive demeanor, almost like a distinguished actor. "Who's that gentleman over there?" I looked at John, but he seemed to be as clueless as I was. Maybe he wandered in by mistake. It's supposed to be a private event. Just as I was wondering how to handle this situation, the man spoke up. "I'm here to discuss the compensation for an affair." "Excuse me?" John and I were literally stunned. "I'm in this line of work." The man handed out his business card with a professional demeanor. It bore the name of a well-known company, and his job title was impressive. He was dressed in an expensive suit, and he carried himself with calm and composure. He didn't seem like he was making things up. "Are you John? Could you please break it off with my wife?" "Wait a minute, John and I are getting married today." I tried to calm the man down, but then I noticed John trembling beside me. "What are you talking about?" John managed to squeeze out those words, though his voice was clearly strained. "My wife should be here somewhere." "Don't play dumb, it won't get you anywhere."
Wait. Natasha and I aren't like that."
"Well, you've just admitted it yourself, haven't you? So, you're having an affair with my wife, Natasha, right?" I couldn't hide my shock.
"Natasha, you mean the woman we just greeted?"
"I believe so." "What did he say about Natasha?" "I heard it was work-related."
"Actually, Natasha doesn't work."
The man sighed deeply. "Let's change the place. Can we use the green room?" I asked my parents to handle the reception, and went ahead to the green room. The man, who introduced himself as Kyle, sat down on the sofa in the green room and started talking. It's a blatant lie that Natasha has anything work-related to do with John. I found out through her phone records that she met John on a dating site. My in-laws, who were already in the green room, exclaimed in surprise.
"We didn't know anything about this." "Don't make strange accusations, we could sue you for defamation."
But Kyle remained calm. "It seems that Natasha has been having an affair with John for 2 years. This time, I couldn't help raising my voice.
2 years ago. But we've been dating since our college days, isn't this some kind of mistake?"
The phone records show it clearly. "Actually, I've been very busy with work for the last few years, with lots of business trips and overtime. It seems that Natasha had the affair when I wasn't looking." Saying this, Kyle took an envelope out of his bag. Inside were printed screenshots of Natasha's smartphone and a couple of photos of her with John.
"This is definitely John in these photos, isn't it?"
My parents gathered around, and we all checked the photos. I've been away from home a lot, I can't say I was blameless. But does that justify an affair? My parents muttered in unison, "No, it doesn't." More than anything, Kyle's demeanor was incredibly convincing. From a certain point, Natasha started wearing a new wristwatch. It was a very nice design, so I looked it up and found out it was part of a pair. I wondered who had the other one, and that's when my investigation began. Kyle had been investigating Natasha's actions during his breaks at work, and discovered that she frequently visited a certain station. It turned out to be the station closest to John's company. They were frequently meeting up after John finished work. Kyle then took out several photos from the envelope that appeared to be taken secretly. They clearly showed John and Natasha getting cozy in a bustling district.
You find it fun stalking like this? Don't take your frustrations out on me just because you can't keep your wife happy.
John's words were bold, but his voice was clearly trembling. The serial number on my wife's wristwatch is 118. What about your wristwatch? My parents restrained Kyle. I took off John's wristwatch and looked at the back of the dial. It's 118. This is a unique number in the world, right? Is it just a coincidence? How could that be? The evidence is all here. Why don't you just admit it and tell the truth? Suddenly, John raised his voice and started kicking the chairs in the green room.
Damn it! I thought I'd never get caught.
John, is what this man is saying true? Without looking at us, John answered while fiddling with his smartphone. There's just one thing that's different. I really do love Natasha. My in-laws whispered to each other in a confused tone. Today, I invited her because Natasha said she wanted to see Lily. At that moment, there was a knock on the green room door. Natasha came in from the guest room. Apparently, John had called her with his smartphone. John, you really do love me, don't you? Of course. My feelings are all for you, Natasha. Natasha and John hugged each other without any hesitation. This time, I couldn't just laugh it off as a joke. I carefully chose my words and asked John. Is it true that you've been cheating? Since Natasha got married, I reluctantly decided to marry you. We met a bit too late, didn't we? If I had met John sooner, I would have married him instead of ending up with such an uncool person. Kyle straightened up from the sofa and said with a resolute attitude.
See, they're so selfish, aren't they? I'm thinking about divorcing my wife. But I'm definitely going to demand a proper compensation for it.
At the word alimony, John and Natasha momentarily flinched.
John, did you know that Natasha was married when you started dating her?
Yeah, I found out a while after we met. But by then, we were already serious about each other. So, you were cheating on me too, weren't you? Unexpectedly, John shook his head. This isn't cheating. Because I have no feelings for you. Then why were you dating me? You were just for housekeeping. What does just for housekeeping mean? According to John, Natasha was his true love, but he needed someone to take care of the household and he wanted children, so he decided to marry me. It seemed he also judged that it would be a good cover to get married around this time for the company and society.
Do you really think you're attractive as a woman? I married you because you could cook a little and you seemed like you could bear strong children. I've had enough.
I reached my limit and slapped John. It was the first time I had ever hit someone. My right hand was tingling. At the same time, I felt disgusted, as if I had touched something filthy. Immediately, Kyle pulled out a wet wipe from his bag and handed it to me. Gratefully, I took it and wiped my hands thoroughly.
Ow! What the hell are you doing? You think you're in a position to defy me?
Even my mother-in-law couldn't stay silent at his words.
Have you always talked to Lily like that? No, Mom, I just lost my temper for a moment.
Hey, Lily.
I got scolded because of you.
It's your fault. There's no way that's true. Is it really true that you've been cheating for the past 2 years? John snorted triumphantly.
You can't trust what this guy says. Besides, the photos might be fake.
But judging from your interactions, it seems like you two really are dating, aren't you? That doesn't prove anything. What, do you have a video or something? I cut into the conversation with my usual surprised tone. I have it on video.
What?
Actually, I had secretly recorded today's situation in the dressing room with a hidden camera, planning to show it as a surprise later. I took out the camera from behind the flower arrangement in the room and checked the footage. From the part where John called me fat to where Kyle confronted him about the affair, everything was recorded. Unexpectedly turning into big news. But it should be sufficient evidence of the affair. Well done, Lily. And as for this guy. Lily, I am truly sorry. My in-laws both apologized to me together. You don't need to apologize. No, it's also our fault for spoiling John and letting him become like this. What can we do to make it up to you? John, you should apologize too.
No way. I haven't done anything wrong. Loving someone is a good thing, right? That's what Mom taught me.
That's not what I meant. Stop talking back and apologize to Lily right now.
It's okay. The foolish one here is John. John, Natasha, how about making a cheating confession in front of the camera?
Say cheese. I grinned and pointed the camera at them. I didn't expect to have this side of me. Hey, don't make that face. Just joke around and reply like you always do. This is my way of joking around. I can't overlook this. Then should we cancel the wedding? You're the one who's going to be embarrassed. I was at a loss for words. The party's start time had already passed. The guests must be waiting for our entrance at the venue. No, I should stick to my own decision. Fortunately, I had invited only a few guests. And they were all trusted close friends, so I could make up for it later. The one who really deserves pity here is John. He cares about appearances, so he invited his bosses from work and even his mentors from his college days. All right, I've got it. Let's start the wedding ceremony. However, just to let you know, we are going to change the flow a bit. I went out to the venue and took the microphone from the MC. John followed behind me. There was a round of applause from the audience. Thank you all for gathering here today. We were supposed to hold a wedding ceremony, but today's event has been changed to an emergency press conference. The venue suddenly became noisy with whispers and murmurs. With clear and articulate pronunciation, as if I had been trained in broadcasting, I continued. Today, we have a guest named Natasha, who is an acquaintance of John through work. But in reality, well, John? I turned the microphone towards John, like an interviewer. The people in the venue looked puzzled. John hesitated to speak, so I pressed him further. What is your real relationship with her? Voices from the audience also started to chime in, urging him to spill the beans already. Still, John seemed determined to remain silent. If this weren't in front of so many people, I would probably have been slapped hard. His fists were trembling under the table. No choice then. This was supposed to be a surprise for today, but please take a look at the hidden camera footage in the backstage. Everyone, please feel free to enjoy your drinks and meals. The large screen on the stage showed everything that had happened earlier, without missing a beat. As the video played, the audience watched intently, and gradually, voices of discontent started to rise. What's going on here? This is ridiculous. From the crowd, someone asked, you two are already living together, aren't you? We met in college, registered our marriage 3 months ago, and have been living together since, leading up to today. The venue was in an uproar. I thought I was marrying John out of love, but it seems I was utterly deceived. I adjusted my life for him, even quitting my job. What has my life been all about? I could hear John clicking his tongue in frustration. A different guest asked, Lily, what do you want to do now? The atmosphere had completely turned into that of a press conference. To be honest, this is all so sudden, I haven't had time to think it through. But I have my parents and trustworthy friends. I plan to figure things out together with them. This response led to a series of repeated questions from the crowd. John kept his head down, acting as if this had nothing to do with him. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you must have a lot of things you want to say, so I will leave the stage to him. You can grill him as much as you want. I put down the microphone and moved to the entrance of the venue, watching the scene unfold. John was left alone on the stage. Some young men in the audience, their tempers flaring, stood up and approached John, some even throwing drinks and food at him. All right, I get it. I was dating Natasha. Lily just wasn't enough for me. At that moment, my mother-in-law appeared, took the microphone, and addressed everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for my foolish son. If it's not too much trouble, Please feel free to give him a piece of your mind." At her signal, people swarmed the stage and surrounded John. I couldn't see John anymore, but I imagined he was getting what he deserved. I thought about how expensive his rental suit was. Concerned about appearances, John had rented the best suit. With this commotion, he would surely have to pay for it. Satisfied after witnessing the chorus of boos from the audience, I returned to the backstage, quickly changed out of my dress, and left the rest to my parents. I also asked them to make sure John couldn't run away from the venue. I wanted to go home immediately. Ever since we started living together, John had been extremely opposed to me entering his room. He would get angry even if I tried to enter for cleaning or searching for something. I suspected there might be some evidence of his infidelity in his room. I asked Kyle to come with me, and we left the venue, heading for home. I was grateful that we had chosen a wedding venue close to our home. Soon we arrived at our house, and the search of John's room began. And then, one thing after another started to come out. Pictures of Natasha, and what seemed to be matching accessories and a pair of watches warranty card, and letters from Natasha, were all revealed. It even came to light that he was traveling with Natasha under the guise of business trips. Kyle meticulously photographed each of these items, and I put them in a cardboard box. It was almost like a police house search. Once all the evidence was gathered, I video called my mother-in-law. "Hi, how's everything going over there?" Bravely, she responded as if nothing was unusual. "The guests are getting heated, and John is still being cornered by everyone." "That's good to hear. Can you put your phone near the microphone so that my voice can be heard in the venue?" She quickly understood what I meant and did as I asked. "Hello, can you hear me? I'm the bride who was supposed to be the star today." I could sense the murmuring in the venue quieting down. "I know some of you might be angry. I have an important announcement to make." The venue went silent. "I will be divorcing John. Unfortunately, today's wedding turned out to be a disaster, but feel free to eat and drink as much as you like, and go home whenever you're ready. The cost will be fully charged to John."
Wait. I wasn't informed about this.
Kyle, who was standing next to me, signaled for me to pass the phone to him. "While we're on the subject, I have an announcement too. I'm also divorcing Natasha." The crowd murmured in surprise. "John, Natasha is an expensive woman. She doesn't do any housework, shops every week, and is absolutely incompetent at work. But now, both of you are free, so please, live happily ever after."
What am I supposed to do now?
You're free to do as you please. Good luck supporting Natasha's lifestyle."
I can't afford to support Natasha's lifestyle.
Natasha, who was nearby, cut in.
I'm not comfortable marrying John either.
Then you're all alone. Good riddance. Don't bother coming back home from today onwards." A round of applause erupted in the venue. Drunk guests' voices could be heard saying, "Good for her," and other cheers. Reluctantly, my mother-in-law agreed to let John stay at her house for a while. Warm messages like "it must have been tough, but you did well. We support you," started arriving on my phone from close friends who were at the venue. Afterwards, the guests reportedly indulged in a grand feast and drinks, and even made sure to take their wedding favors home with them before leaving. A few days after the tumultuous wedding, I was returning to my condo after shopping when I found John standing in front of my door, holding a disproportionately large bouquet of flowers. "I came to apologize, hoping you would forgive me. Can I come in?" "No." "Come on, don't be so stubborn. The wedding was just a moment of confusion, right?"
Absolutely not.
John, for some reason, had a smug smile on his face. He tried to hand me the huge bouquet of roses. "All women love flowers, right? Cheer up." But I had shopping bags in both hands and couldn't possibly accept the flowers. Not that I wanted to, even if my hands were free.
I'm sick of your assumptions and lack of consideration. Just go home.
John slowly moved closer to me. I felt threatened and turned my back on him to call my mother-in-law. The back and forth with John continued, and when he tried to force his way into the house with a spare key, my mother-in-law arrived just in time.
"What the hell are you doing?"
A shout from my usually refined mother-in-law, which I had never heard before, echoed throughout the area. "Mom, why are you here?" "I came here thinking of making amends with Lily."
"Don't talk nonsense and just disappear. Do not show your face in front of us ever again."
With that, my mother-in-law snatched John's bouquet and hit him square in the face with it. John's face was covered in small cuts from the rose thorns, and torn petals and leaves were scattered all over his body, making for a truly pitiful sight.
"If you make any more strange moves, I'm calling the police. And don't you even think about coming back to our house."
He seemed genuinely scared by her words. John left with his tail between his legs.
"I'm really sorry about this. Actually, I declared yesterday that I was severing parental ties with him. He left the house, but I never imagined he would be here."
While efficiently cleaning up the remains of the bouquet scattered on the floor, my mother-in-law apologized to me over and over again. "You don't have to apologize. Please come in and have some tea."
"No, I'm going to excuse myself now. If he comes near you again, don't hesitate to contact me. I will protect you, no matter what."
I was on the verge of tears from her words. I had an ally on my side. I decided to rely on her in times of trouble, and with that, we said our goodbyes. Later on, I managed to finalize the divorce, and I was relieved. I and Kyle each demanded $30,000 in damages from John. I didn't forget to claim the full $20,000 for the wedding expenses, including the gifts for the guests. The guests seemed to have enjoyed themselves quite a bit, and I couldn't help but laugh when I saw the hefty bill. John, unable to cover the costs with his salary alone, had moved to a cheap, small one-room apartment and was working tirelessly day and night. His boss had attended the wedding, which resulted in him losing face at work as well, but he couldn't afford to quit his job because he needed to make ends meet. Now, it seems like he's living every day in a very uncomfortable and awkward position. I heard from my mother-in-law that right after that incident, Natasha broke up with him. Apparently, Natasha had met another man through an online dating site and decided to date him instead. I can hardly imagine that things will go well for them. Especially since Natasha also has to pay us damages. I moved to a smaller, but nicer apartment. Moving was a hassle, but I decided it was risky to let John know where I lived. The evidence of John's affair is packed in a large cardboard box, sitting in a corner of my new home. So far, the alimony has been paid on time, but I haven't touched the money at all. Thanks to that, my savings have increased significantly. In the midst of all the commotion, a strange kind of fortune befell me. I lost about 15 pounds due to the stress of the divorce. Every time I looked in the mirror, I felt like I had been reborn. I went back to work, and through business contacts, I was able to meet a wonderful man. We are still dating, and every day is fulfilling. I have a good feeling that things will work out with my new partner this time.
The land that was in my mother-in-law's name, I've gone ahead and changed it to my name.
The eldest son's wife, who had unilaterally changed the deed of the land I inherited from my late husband into her name. It's true that we never got along, but I never expected her to go this far. When I looked to my eldest son for help, there he was, looking at me with a cold gaze.
"Always picking on my wife, you're the worst, Mom. If you have even a shred of remorse, just graciously hand over the land to my wife and show some sincerity by living out the rest of your life as a maid."
My eldest son was taking his wife's side. Let me be clear, I never intended to pick on her. If anything, I was the one being bullied. But in this situation, I didn't think anything I said would get through. I became so fed up with trying to persuade them, I decided to leave, just as the eldest son's wife suggested. So I should be the one to leave, right? I asked to be sure, only to be mocked for not crying and for putting on a brave face. But I wonder who's really putting on a brave face. After I leave, what will become of these two? They probably haven't realized yet. My husband and I were both in our late 50s. We have 2 sons who are both married with their own families, living away from home. So now, it's just the 2 of us, a quiet couple's life. Where we live is the epitome of the countryside that anyone would imagine. Without a car, it's inconvenient to get to the nearest train station, and there's a bus, but it only runs about twice an hour during commute times and doesn't operate on Sundays or holidays. There's a liquor store that doubles as a convenience store, in name only, standing alone at the center of the village. My eldest son despised this rural lifestyle. He wanted to go to a more prosperous high school in the nearby area, but ended up reluctantly attending a local agricultural school because his grades weren't good enough. With that resentment, upon graduating high school, he left home as if fleeing. My eldest son married a woman he met while living in the city he always dreamed of, and he has continued to live there, rarely visiting his childhood home. The eldest son and his wife have returned home a few times for marriage greetings, but other than that, they don't come by at all, nor do they get in touch. Still, they are family, and sometimes there are urgent matters that can't be ignored. In our family, it has been the daughters-in-law who have traditionally handled matters concerning the house. Even without close friendships, it's been that way. So, when I've needed to see my eldest son's wife, I've been the one to make the trip. Because my daughter-in-law really dislikes the countryside. When I visit, she says I bring a country smell and sprays air freshener around me. At first, it bothered me, but now I've learned to let it slide as a trivial matter. Especially because our relationship is already distant, and I didn't want to make it more awkward. Meanwhile, my second son lives in a remote area due to his job. The town where the second son and his wife live isn't much different from the rural town where he grew up. The second son says driving isn't too much of a hassle for him, and he often comes home to check on us, his parents. His wife is a charming woman with a generous nature, and we share similar values, which is why our relationship with her is exceptionally good. Then, while still in my late 50s, my husband passed away unexpectedly. I was engulfed in sorrow. My husband often said that when he passed away first, his only wish was that I wouldn't struggle and would complete the rest of my life without hardship. He said that if the land and house that have been passed down through his ancestors became too much for me to handle or a hindrance in my life, I should prioritize my life over them. In other words, once I inherited them, I could do as I pleased. My husband did talk to our eldest son about inheriting the land and house, a family tradition. But my city-loving eldest son, and especially his wife, vehemently refused, saying, unless it's prime real estate in a major city like New York, inheriting worthless rural land is pointless. So, the eldest son followed her wish and desired something else. The second son also preferred something other than the land and house, so he inherited other assets. I learned later that the second son thought it best for me to inherit the place filled with our memories. The second son and his wife considered moving back and living with me, but they decided against it because it would be too much of a burden on his commute. Still, they've told me warmly not to overdo it on my own, and that if it ever became unavoidable, they would be open to living together at home. I have no intention of sacrificing my sons' lives to be tied down to the land and house. When the time comes, I'll make a clean decision. Thus, I took the land and house, and the sons split the remaining assets evenly. After a while, development began nearby, and the value of the land started to rise. I'm in my 60s now, but I still have plenty of energy and enthusiasm for country life. As the development proceeds, the opinions and feelings about it vary among the people. For me, if a supermarket is built close by, I won't need to drive, and it could help avoid family disputes over issues like giving up driving licenses in old age. Most importantly, if it reduces the worries of my caring second son and his wife, then the development isn't all bad. I'm honestly excited about possibly having a more convenient life. However, I never imagined that my peace would be disrupted by the unexpected actions of my eldest son's wife. As the development progressed and rumors spread about an increase in bus services to the nearest station and the construction of high-rise apartments nearby, my estranged eldest son reached out. He said something along the lines of, My attempt to make it big in the city has failed, and I've ended up quitting my job. Trying to earn a living in the city was a fleeting dream. I urged him to get to the point. Then he expressed a desire to return and live at home. When I asked him, "So, you want to live together?" he seemed to affirm, but with hesitant phrasing. About a month ago, at my husband's third-year memorial, a family gathering took place. At that time, my eldest son still complained about the countryside odor, so what had changed his mind? In the middle of our conversation, his wife abruptly interjected. "You really live in a lovely place. If it's getting all modern with the land development, you should have said so. Some places have gotten a better view since the mountain trees were cut down. There have been rumors for quite a while that a large shopping mall might go in there." The eldest son's wife didn't care about the countryside property before, thinking it wasn't worth considering, but now that it's developing into a more livable area, she's singing a different tune. The land and house my husband left us are in a very good location. Besides the spot where our house stands, the mountain behind our home is also land I inherited from my husband. There's gonna be land purchases with the development, right? Are you gonna let go of the mountain behind the house? I see, the eldest son and his wife regret not caring for this countryside property before. They can't say they want to inherit the land now, so they're cozying up to me, probably wanting a cut of the money if I sell the mountain. Oh dear, how awful of me. The real issue isn't money, it's about my husband. I listened skeptically to the eldest son's wife's excuses, which seemed quite theatrical. It felt like I was being subjected to a poor speech. To put it simply, it seems true that the eldest son has lost his job and is now unemployed. Their savings are so low they're worried about next month's rent. When I asked about the inheritance split with the younger son, she'd rather not touch that if possible. It's only been since the 3rd anniversary of my husband's death, so she says she wants to be thoughtful about how to use the money he left, but if they're struggling that much, they should use it. I thought. I held back from saying that, as it would likely result in accusations of being cold-hearted. Struggling to pay for rent, gas, and electricity, the eldest son's wife makes a heartfelt appeal, her voice choked with tears. She's asking to move in with me. Live in the countryside? You, who hated the countryside and were adamant about living in the city. I suggested that the eldest son take over, asking if he's going to find a job in the countryside. Wouldn't you be better off re-employing in the city? I asked. It was hard to imagine the eldest son, who left for the city as if he was running away from home, accepting a rural life now. The eldest son says he's in a tight spot, soon even eating will become difficult, so he's asking for help. Until the very end, he doesn't clearly say whether he's looking to re-employ in the city or the countryside. So, I set conditions. Moving in is temporary, just until the eldest son finds a new job. I added that he needs to work, even if it's just part-time, while living with us. In this area, with the land development, there's an increase in short-term job postings. I figured he'd get hired if he wasn't too picky. I thought, if I take care of them for about 6 months, they'd save up a decent amount of money and be ready for a fresh start. Marriage is about helping each other out, after all. I assumed the eldest son's wife would also work outside, even if not every day, to help gather funds for their new start. But when we actually started living together, all my plans fell apart. The eldest son was indeed busy looking for work. He searched for jobs during the day and worked as a security guard at construction sites for a few hours in the evening. The eldest son's wife, who had been meek at first, changed her tune as soon as her husband started spending long hours away from home for job hunting and part-time work. Oh, this is such a drag. I can't stand it. Using a pickup for shopping is just too tacky for me. Shopping had become a once-a-week affair, and the convenience of a pickup truck was simply unmatched, unlike the fancy cars you'd see in the city. She was the one who had offered to do the shopping. But after going once, she complained that the pickup was too embarrassing and refused to go again. In front of her husband, she'd praise my cooking and express a desire to learn, but when he wasn't around, she'd do the exact opposite. She couldn't stand the country-style cooking, craving French cuisine instead. She'd complain about mom's home cooking being annoying and then skip her turn to cook. One day, my eldest son's wife said she was gonna cook dinner tonight, so trusting her word, I headed off to tend to the backwoods. Without regular checkups and asking folks to cut down trees, the woods can get wild in no time. It's especially important around the change of seasons and dealing with fallen leaves, and since my husband passed, I've been hiring some young folks from the community to help out. But I can't always leave it to others, so I sometimes go to check on things myself. After making my rounds in the mountains, I came home exhausted in the evening only to find no lights on in the house and the doors locked, leaving me unable to get in. I tried calling my eldest son's wife's cell, but couldn't get through, and was at my wit's end when my son came home. As I was explaining the situation, the eldest son's wife arrived, so I confronted her, asking where she'd been and why she'd locked up. "How could you?" she snapped. "I did just like you told me, went shopping, and you forget what you asked for." She went on to tell my son that I insisted on having some fancy dish for dinner and said if she couldn't serve that dish tonight, she should leave the house. I never said any such thing and didn't even know I'd been left alone. But my son just took his wife's side without question.
"Just because we're living together reluctantly doesn't mean you should pick on my wife. She's not used to country living. You can't expect her to find ingredients for some fancy dishes out here in the boonies."
He accused me of deliberately making her go out as a form of harassment, even though he knew better. My son and I have always had our differences and have had our fair share of arguments in the past, but this was the first time I was berated so unfairly and one-sidedly. I was looking at my son, and yet he felt like a stranger, which was heartbreaking. I don't demand he take my side. But in the world, husbands tend to have a happier marriage when they side with their wives, and my late husband always stood by me. However, he always made sure to listen to both sides, so we had a good relationship with his mother while she was alive. But my son just yells at me, taking his wife's word over mine. Suddenly he turned surly and said, "Well, that fancy dish you're so keen on? Go ahead and make it yourself and eat all you want. I'm taking my wife out to eat." He snatched the keys from his wife and threw them at me before heading back the way he came. When I entered the house, I saw that my son's wife hadn't done a stitch of housework. It was just as I left it in the morning. I was so upset, I couldn't stop crying. But there was so much to do, it almost seemed a waste to wipe away the tears, so I just got on with the chores while crying. Later, the owner of the only diner around here, where we used to go as a family when the kids were little, came by to see if I was all right. My husband and the diner owner were childhood friends. And I knew my son was aware of his dad's fondness for the place. It turns out my son and his wife had been bad-mouthing me there. The owner said my son's wife was the one filling his head with all this stuff about me. I didn't go into details, just thanked the owner for letting me know. He said to call if I ever needed anything and didn't pry further. Though he looked sad, saying, "Guess people change when they move to the city, huh?" After all this, I decided not to expect anything from my son's wife anymore. If my efforts to get along don't get through, then it's just a waste of time. Better to spend that time and energy getting the chores done myself. I'd be no different from my son's wife if I thought about getting back at her for what she did. As usual, no matter what my son's wife did, I prepared meals for 3 and did the laundry for 3. Whether she thought it was her due or was pleased to have manipulated things in her favor, she continued to act like a guest in the house. Then one day, she came out with something that floored me.
"This property and house that's in your name, I'm in the process of transferring it to my name."
She claimed that she already had all the paperwork ready, flashing the documents at me. But since she didn't show them clearly, it only increased my suspicion about her story. Given my familiarity with such papers from when my husband transferred the property to me, they looked like obvious fakes. When I asked her if they were real, she retorted, "Of course, they are.
From now on, I'm taking over as the head of this household. If you don't want to be kicked out, then show some remorse and apologize for the way you've treated your daughter-in-law as punishment. How about this? Continue to live here as my personal maid. If that doesn't suit you, you're welcome to leave. Her bold attitude suggested she believed the documents she held were legitimate. I confronted my eldest son, demanding an explanation. Shouldn't you be the one leaving if you can't keep your promise to live together? I tried to argue with common sense, but my eldest son retorted that I was the one who broke our promise first. It's a shame to be raised by the worst kind of mother who bullies her daughter-in-law. If you feel bad about it, then as a mother, you should just retire and leave everything to your son. Just because we've clashed, doesn't mean you should take it out on my wife out of spite. That's the lowest thing a person can do. Aren't you ashamed, a grown woman acting like this? My daughter-in-law managed to convince my son that I was harsh on her because I hated him. Using what she had heard about our differences in values and our incompatible temperaments, my daughter-in-law took advantage of the situation. Given that my relationship with my eldest son was already strained, it was easy for her to make things worse. Realizing that nothing I said to my son now would be believed, I felt that trying to persuade him was a waste of energy. Suddenly, my husband's words crossed my mind. Fine. I'll consider everything you've said. But I need a week's grace period because I have preparations of my own, I consented. My daughter-in-law was reluctant, but my eldest son agreed. It took exactly 1 week to sort out what belongings to take and to find a new place to move to, among other necessary arrangements. After the agreed week, I left the house. As I was leaving, my daughter-in-law taunted me with a triumphant look, telling me to get out. I didn't respond to her insults and left the house in silence, giving myself a mental fist pump. This was the beginning of my comeback. 1 month later, just as I expected, I received a frantic call from my daughter-in-law. She was in a frenzy because when she tried to cash in by selling the land immediately, she was told it was already in the process of being subdivided and couldn't be sold. "What have you done?" she screamed in a shrill voice that was unbearable, spewing insults like a machine gun. In the midst of local land development, there had been an offer to buy the forested hill behind our house along with the land as a package. The condition was that it had to be sold as a set. It was a welcome offer as managing the hill on my own was challenging. Yet, I still had a desire to live in the house I had shared with my husband a bit longer, so I put the offer on hold. During this time, the issue of our home's deterioration came up. A relative in construction had mentioned concerns about our ancestral home's aging condition when they visited for my husband's memorial service. The house felt too large for just me alone, a sharp contrast to when it felt just right for 3 generations. I couldn't deny a sense of loneliness being left behind in it. Even if I rebuilt the house, my sons probably wouldn't live there anyway. I began to think it might be best to sell it after my husband's 7th death anniversary. The company interested in buying the forest and land told me such developments take years, so there was no rush. However, the start of cohabitation with my eldest son and his wife gradually shifted my plans. Determined not to wait until my husband's 7th memorial, I decided to let go of the house. The company even offered to cover the cost of demolishing the house and clearing the land, which was a relief to me. I couldn't bear the thought of my eldest son's wife, who believed she had a genuine contract, doing as she pleased with the land my husband had left. I refused to give in to her, nor to my eldest son, who followed his wife's words without any doubt. I informed my younger son of everything that had happened and shared my decision. He said he was sad to see the family home go, but reminded me that memories are held in the heart, not in things. Moreover, my younger son and his wife had offered me to live with them. I know there's some anxiety about leaving the familiar place, but this area is pretty rural, too, so I think they'll come to like it. I'm currently living with my 2nd son and his wife, and I'm really happy with their kindness. I just let the first son's wife screaming go in one ear and out the other, and end the call myself at just the right moment, switching to block the incoming calls. Later, my eldest son, having asked around the relatives about where I was, came to the 2nd son's house. He came crying to me for help. Thinking it was too late, I was about to send him back, but then he started telling me how it was all his wife's doing after she kicked me out.
It all started when a friend of the first son's wife introduced her to a paralegal. She trusted her friend, so of course, she also believed the paralegal without doubt. She was told she could change the land and house from my name to hers by just giving a thank you fee. Moreover, she was told the fee could be less than half the market rate. Later, when a big sum of money would come in, she thought they could just cover any shortfall from my husband's estate. On the promised day, the friend and the paralegal prepared the transfer documents and handed them over to the first son's wife. She, without any suspicion, believed them to be genuine and handed over the thank you fee. Once the preparations were done, the first son's wife eagerly explained everything to the eldest son when he came back from his part-time job. Exhausted, the eldest son didn't think deeply and trusted his wife's words as the truth. If you think about it, it's a strange story that the wife becomes the homeowner while her husband is still alive, but she convinced him by saying, "It'll be more convenient for your mom if it's in my name." As a fellow housewife, we can have a heart-to-heart and work things out. He foolishly agreed after being told such a plausible story. While the eldest son was out looking for a job and doing part-time work, the first son's wife methodically planned to kick me out, and by brainwashing the eldest son behind my back, she successfully managed to get me out. However, when she triumphantly went to sell the house and land, she was told it was impossible because the land was still being divided and got desperate. She tried to contact the friend and the paralegal, but couldn't reach them. Eventually, their phone got disconnected, and when she contacted the friend's parents' house, she was told they had disowned the criminal and didn't know where she was. That's when she finally learned that her friend had been a repeat fraudster and was a convicted criminal. The first son's wife later found out that many of her former classmates had been victims of this friend. The friend had been introducing former classmates as fake lawyers, accountants, and paralegals, and swindling them out of their service fees. The first son's wife had mentioned the land to her friend, which led to the introduction of the so-called paralegal. Among the victims, some had filed police reports, while others had given up, considering it a costly lesson. Those people could say that because they still had a home, even though they lost money. The eldest son and his wife, having lost money, their home, and the inheritance, had to focus on sorting out the situation before even considering filing a complaint. When I suggested that they should be able to rent an apartment since most of the inheritance should still be there, the eldest son said that the ATM card for the account where the inheritance was deposited had been swapped out with a different card. By the time they realized, all the money had been withdrawn. He came begging, genuinely broke, pleading for help. He explained that the first son's wife had been told that additional charges had arisen because the document preparation had been quite a hassle, and she went to withdraw money with her friend. That's probably when the PIN was stolen. I've heard that if you hire a pro to swap cards, you won't even notice it. Driven by immediate greed and lacking attention, the first son's wife had become an easy target after blabbering about the inheritance to her friend. I heard that a little while back, warnings had been circulating from the alma mater of my eldest son's wife. They'd been alerting that a graduate had been repeatedly defrauding classmates and juniors, so be careful with contacts and offers from people you don't usually keep in touch with. But the first son's wife, thinking only idiots fall for scams, ignored the alerts. I turned away from my eldest son and his wife, believing they got what they deserved for being driven by greed. Though the inheritance was gone, I was sure the eldest had some money saved from his part-time job. But that measly part-time pay? Gone with the wind on drink tabs, for sure. Led astray by drinking buddies, his savings from part-time work dwindled to nothing. It's your own fault for not planning ahead. I rebuffed him once more. Just as I was getting troubled by his persistence, my daughter-in-law from my second son came home. Her return, GI slung over her shoulder, radiated such a force that my eldest felt a threat and skedaddled. The second son's wife had recently taken up self-defense as a hobby. When the homeward-bound daughter-in-law from martial arts classes ran into the lingering eldest, he got scared and beat it. Saved by the bell. I thanked my daughter-in-law from my second son for the timely rescue. The eldest son and his wife, having been living as live-in workers at a diner run by a childhood friend of my husband, got booted for continuously griping about the low pay compared to the big city. Do they even know what gratitude is? After that, no one would lend a hand to my eldest son and his wife. They somehow survived until one day, a new house was built on the land where we used to live. Seeing this, my eldest son's wife snapped and broke in. "This is my land and house. It was supposed to be mine." Spouting such nonsense and squatting there led to the police being called and her arrest on the spot. I was contacted by the police as a potential guarantor, but I refused. Then she started her silence, saying she wouldn't talk unless her mother came. The police asked me to help persuade her, but I refused as well. "Your son is asking for help," they relayed, but I felt no obligation to assist, suggesting they might as well lock him up. When the eldest son's wife was arrested, she claimed she had been tricked by a fraud. Apparently, there were a number of similar complaints filed, which made her story seem credible, but that doesn't mean her crimes were erased. She got squeezed for all she was worth, and I heard that the friend and the fake paralegal who committed the fraud are still at large. Even if they are caught, my son was told that the stolen money won't be returned. It seems that he has finally seen the light after the inheritance was not only used without permission but also stolen. The couple divorced, each starting a new path, but my eldest son seems to struggle finding stable work. His ex-wife, having had enough of the countryside, vanished one day after working at a seedy bar back in the city, leaving behind significant debts. I've officially moved in with my second son and his wife. The living arrangement started as a trial due to the ordeal with the eldest son's family. I didn't want to burden my daughter-in-law. But living together turned out great. We say what we want without tension and click well since she's not overbearing. Most importantly, we share the same taste and exchange recipes, making every day enjoyable. The considerate environment we've built doesn't strain us with needless courtesies. Neighbors even mistake my daughter-in-law and me for mother and daughter. That's how well we get along. As my husband would have wished, I'm savoring life with my second son and his family. Looking forward to sharing these stories. I prayed at my husband's grave.
Mom's been in an accident and taken to the hospital. Please, take me there.
I begged my husband, tears streaming down my face. I had just received a call that my mother was in critical condition, unconscious after a traffic accident. But when I told my husband, he said, "I can't, I'm off on a trip with my colleague," and rejected my pleas. Even as I persisted, he seemed to mock me with a sneer. To me, the trip is more important. Attending someone's bedside is a waste of time. I'm definitely not going. My name is Erica, I'm 29. I married Ken, a year my senior, 2 years ago, and we both work full-time. We met at college. There were many classmates, so it was hard to talk to everyone, but we got closer after sitting next to each other at a party one day. We also discovered we both were only children raised by single mothers after losing our fathers early, which brought us closer quickly. We started going out often, and it naturally led to a relationship. As we both settled into our jobs after graduating from college, Ken proposed. We're both satisfied with our careers, so we haven't thought about children yet. We have talked about buying a house when the time comes. We're currently renting a place, and both of our homes are nearby. Since both of our fathers passed away, our mothers live alone. My mother, Sally, and my mother-in-law, Mary, get along very well. They got along because they were close in age and had raised their children on their own without remarrying. They became friends, often having coffee and traveling together. I was surprised because I never expected them to get so close, but it's great seeing them happy as they seem to have a lot of fun together. Mary treats me well too. However, Ken seems to dislike that Mary prioritizes my mother over him. He has a strong attachment to his mother. Before marriage, I knew he cherished his mother from his behavior. I was also brought up in a single-parent household, so I can understand his feelings. After getting married and starting living together, I saw his true nature. Once, when my mother sent a picture of her having lunch with Mary, The message said, "I'm having lunch with Mary now," and a picture of the two of them smiling was attached, and I remember naturally smiling as well. "Hey, Ken, it looks like your moms are having lunch right now." "Look, they sent me a photo," I said, and showed the image to Ken, who was just at home, but as soon as he saw it, he was in a good mood. It got so bad that I clicked my tongue.
"Is this some kind of spite? What did you say?"
I didn't know he disliked my mother then. It was true that Ken often didn't talk much in front of his mother, but I thought that was because he was nervous because he had only been married for a short time. I never imagined that he would shun my mother just because she was on good terms with his own mother.
Because of that person, my mother has been turning down my invitations to dinner lately. I've been telling her that she has plans with Sally. Don't you know that your mother should be a little more reserved?
I had no idea that Ken was thinking such a thing, and I was shocked to hear him say something bad about my mother. My mother-in-law apparently realized early on that Ken hated my mother. Mary realized Ken's feelings early and scolded him during dinner when he was being sarcastic to my mother.
"Ken, what's this attitude towards Sally? Stop it."
"What's this? Mom always supports this person. You've always said that I'm your precious son. It's funny how you prioritize someone you've recently become friends with over your own son." Ken retorted, saying, "I'm sure not, but to be honest, I couldn't help but think that his obsession with his mother-in-law was abnormal." Later, Mary apologized to me and my mother when Ken wasn't around.
"I might have spoiled him too much.
I'm sorry."
Mary, there's no need to be worried. I don't either. Ken really loves you."
My mother, calm by nature, so she doesn't usually get angry at people. This time as well, she pretended to understand Ken without blaming him, but I quickly realized that she was actually hurt in her heart. Ken's attitude worsened, criticizing my mother every chance he got. He has never openly attacked his mother because his stepmother protects her. However, whenever my mother and mother-in-law seemed to be getting along well, she complained to me, and eventually started saying bad things about my mother on a daily basis. Early in our second year of marriage, we had a huge fight. After the argument, the problem was never resolved, and since then, our relationship became strained, and we spoke less. Lately, Ken's been coming home late and going out alone on weekends. When I asked, he said it's just work and needs to work more time, but something felt off. Even when he said that, I wasn't very convinced and couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort. Then, one Sunday, when we were both off, Ken was packing for something. Apparently, there is no day off work today. As I was about to ask Ken why he was packing, a call came through on my smartphone. An unknown number displayed on the screen, and with curiosity, I answered only to find out it was the police on the line. They confirmed I was Sally's daughter and then dropped the bombshell. "Your mother has been in a traffic accident." My mind went blank.
"My mom!"
They told me she had been taken to the hospital in critical condition, unconscious. After getting the hospital's name, my shaking hands managed to end the call. Tears flooded as I struggled to think, but knew I needed to get to the hospital. Without a driver's license, I pleaded with Ken to take me.
"Ken, it's awful. Mom's been in an accident. She's at the hospital. Please, we need to go now."
But Ken just turned a disgusted face towards me. "Huh? I've got a trip with my colleague now, I'll miss the gathering time." "Deal with it yourself," he firmly refused.
"A trip? I had no idea it was today."
I realized why he was packing, but he hadn't informed me at all. He then floored me by saying the trip was for 2 weeks.
"You can't be serious. Mom might."
"Quiet down, the trip is more important to me.
Besides, your mom's just an unrelated old woman to me. Visiting her would be a waste of time. I'm not going."
Ken mocked me with his cruel words. "Get away, I'm busy, and I got a plane to catch," he said, pushing past me, humming as he packed his clothes into his suitcase. Furious, I yelled, "You're the worst. Just do whatever you want," and stormed out to take a taxi to the hospital. Ken left for his trip as planned. He had no idea of the crisis unfolding around me during the trip. I tried calling him repeatedly to no avail, and the 2 weeks passed without any contact. 2 weeks later, Ken came home in high spirits. I greeted him with a cold stare. I have to go give my mom a souvenir now. I wonder if she's doing well. He cheerfully talked about visiting his mom with souvenirs, but I silently agreed to go with him to his mother's house. On the way, he joyfully talked about the gifts he bought. Not a word about my mom's accident. When they arrived at my in-laws' house, Ken stopped them as they were about to open the front door. Huh? Why is it locked? Arriving at a locked front door puzzled him. His mom didn't usually lock it when home. Is mom out? He mumbled. Pushing past him, I used the spare key I had to open the door. Why do you have the house keys? Ken looked suspicious, but I didn't respond. Ken, entering before me, tilted his head as he couldn't find his mom. Stopping him from heading to the living room, I directed him. Not that way. Come this way, I said, leading Ken to another room. The door was open, and inside was a fresh portrait of his mother, Mary.
What? What's going on? What is this?
Holding back anger, I sighed and explained. Mary passed away while you were on your trip. The funeral is already over, I said, and Ken glared at me furiously.
Don't joke, this can't be. Why should she die? It was your mother who was supposed to be.
I was appalled by his disgraceful outburst, but told him calmly what happened after my mother's accident. My mom woke up after the accident. She's recovering from a fracture. My mother is still in the hospital, but thankfully, she was alive thanks to the medical team's efforts. Ken, still not understanding, asked. Then why is my mom? I struggled to say, the day your mom fell from the pedestrian bridge, she was on her way to our house. I suggested he had told her about the trip. You told your mom in advance that you were going on a trip, right? Huh? Oh, I did say that. Mary has been distrustful of you lately. She says she hasn't been able to contact you often. That's why I think she was planning on coming to see if you were really going on the trip. When I said that, Ken's eyes widened in surprise. A month ago, Mary told me that she used to hear from Ken almost every day with calls and texts, but recently, the communication had almost stopped. She'd try to call him because of urgent matters, and when he'd call back, he'd say he was busy and hang up quickly. Mary thought maybe Ken was just getting older and not clinging to his mom as much. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Ken was hiding something. That's why, driven by suspicion, she went to check if Ken really was on a company trip at the exact time I received the call about my mom's accident. It turns out that Mary had passed away carrying the souvenirs she bought with my mom on a day trip last month, probably intending to drop by under the pretext of giving us those gifts. I was so distraught that day, I couldn't think of anything but getting to the hospital as quickly as possible, and I didn't have the presence of mind to tell Mary about my mom's accident. Mary had taken the bus to the stop nearest to our apartment and must have been walking the rest from there. There's a pedestrian overpass on the way, and it seems she fell while crossing it. Witnesses say she lost her footing just before reaching the top and tumbled down. An ambulance was called immediately, but she had hit her head hard. And so, Mary was gone. After explaining all this to Ken, I glared at him fiercely.
After learning about Mary, I called you so many times.
For 2 weeks, no matter how I tried to reach him, Ken never answered his phone or returned my emails. Since there was no other relative who could arrange the funeral, I did all. I had to take on that role and managed to get through Mary's funeral while my mom was still in a critical state.
These past 2 weeks, you've been ignoring my calls and gallivanting around, right? This whole thing has shown me exactly what kind of person you are. I'm divorcing you.
When I declared that, Ken just collapsed to the floor and started bawling.
You. How can you talk about divorce right after your mom passed? And I didn't contact you because I was always with my coworkers. I didn't have the time.
He blubbered, making excuses. I was getting even angrier. Stop lying. I shouted, pulling out a piece of paper from my bag and thrusting it in front of Ken. It was a schedule for the trip I found in Ken's room.
It says here the trip was from the 12th to the 19th for 1 week. But you were gone from the 5th to the 19th.
Right before you left, you said the trip was 2 weeks.
So where were you and what were you doing for that first week?
Well, I know what you've been up to. You've been cheating, haven't you?
And you spent that week with her, didn't you?
I said, confident in my accusation. Ken stopped crying and started to panic.
What are you talking about, cheating? I took the rest of the week off to travel with a friend for a break.
I've been so busy at work lately. Sick of his lies, I pulled out a smartphone from my pocket. The moment Ken saw that, his face turned pale. This phone was Ken's, found in his wardrobe while he was away. There's probably another smartphone in Ken's bag. He probably had another phone in his bag to communicate with his mistress. Ken had said he couldn't contact me while he was away, but he had left his regular phone at home, so of course, he wouldn't notice any calls.
You're full of lies. You left this phone at home to spend time with your lover, didn't you?
When I placed the smartphone in front of Ken, he started shaking and banged his fist on the floor. Yeah, that's right. I've been fed up with you for a long time. I have someone else I love now, he yelled defiantly, and then, wait, how did you know where to find the phone? You didn't snoop through my room while I was gone, did you? I was appalled. I glanced at Mary's portrait, apologizing to her in my mind for this display before responding. Mary told me, I said, and Ken choked on his words. After a big fight over my mom, Ken started coming home late and going out alone on his days off, claiming to be working. When I started feeling suspicious because of his unnatural periods of unavailability, I talked to Mary about it. Mary, who also had her doubts about Ken, gave me some advice.
He's always had a habit of hiding things that don't suit him. Like a bad test score or a glass that your father cherished that he broke by accident. He used to keep these things carefully in the back of his wardrobe. If there were a bunch of towels in the back of the drawer, I would probably hide them there.
After my mother-in-law passed away, I remembered those words and searched in Ken's room, and as expected, I found a smartphone.
No way, Mom did that to you.
Ken seemed genuinely shocked to find out his beloved mother, Mary, had doubted him. Despite his dismay, I felt nothing for him and sternly told him, because of what happened, I am asking you the divorce, and I'm willing to talk to a lawyer and take this to court if necessary. Ken groaned but, realizing he had no escape, he reluctantly agreed. After we properly divided our assets, the divorce went through without a hitch. But the following month, just as I was settling into my new life, Ken called. Reluctantly, I answered, and he blurted out, Erica. Please, I need your help.
What now, Ken? What happened?
He was in trouble because his company found out about Mary's funeral. Mary had been listed as a dependent for Ken's benefits, so he was supposed to return her insurance card to the company after her passing. The company only learned of her death through this process, and it became apparent that her funeral happened while Ken was supposed to be on a company trip. His colleagues viewed him coldly, considering him an ungrateful son for not attending his own mother's funeral. Ken tried to shift the blame by saying I didn't inform him about the funeral. However, it probably wasn't a good idea to rush and tell so many people. He told different stories to different people at his workplace. It led to inconsistencies that revealed his lies. Already seen as irresponsible, his repeated lies made people doubt his character even more, leading to his isolation and eventual resignation from his job. Now without an income, Ken was living off Mary's inheritance at her house.
The neighbors found out I didn't attend the funeral, and it's awkward just walking outside. I thought about selling the house, but it's old and won't sell.
Ken is recognized by the neighbors as a bastard son, and seems to be uncomfortable even walking outside. So he made arrangements to sell my in-laws' house and move in as soon as possible, but since it's an old house, there doesn't seem to be any sign of it selling.
Erica, let's start over. Remarry me, and let's live together again.
I was disgusted when I heard those words. I realized he only reached out because he was in a tough spot, and I replied firmly.
Don't be ridiculous. I want nothing to do with you, especially not a remarriage. I beg you, if you keep this up, I don't know you anymore. You should just live with the person you're cheating on with instead of me.
When Ken refused with all his might, he began to mumble something. No, actually, I've already broken up with my partner. He continued to beg, revealing that his affair partner had left him after finding out about Mary's funeral and that he had been married all along. Ken apparently hid the fact that he was married and was dumped by the woman he was furious with, so he is now alone. I told him coldly, you got what you deserved. I have no intention of being with someone like you. As I was about to hang up, Ken frantically said, wait. If you won't agree to remarry, I'll come to your house and talk directly. You're at your parents' place, right? I cut him off with a lie, no, I'm not there, to which he quickly asked.
Then where are you?
I'm not telling you.
And by the way, I've changed jobs, so even if you wait outside my old workplace, it won't do you any good. I've told everyone to call the police if they see you around.
I decided to sell my parents' house in order to distance myself from Ken as much as possible due to this incident. However, since my parents' house is quite old, it is unlikely that they will find a buyer. So, with my mother's consent, I turned it into a vacant lot and sold it. Speaking of my mother, she was finally discharged from the hospital recently, but she lost her mother-in-law, who was a dear friend, and she is feeling quite haggard. So I moved to another place where I could live quietly with my mother. As a result, I quit the company I was working for and changed jobs.
Then at least tell me where you are. I was also visiting your mother, who has been taking care of me until now.
Ken was desperately trying to find out where I was, but his words made me angry and my voice was surprisingly cold.
Taking care of you? You've been complaining about my mother a lot, but don't say such convenient words now. Besides, my mother also says she doesn't want to see you again. Hey, wait a minute, Erica!
Ken was still yelling something, but I ended the call without mercy. After hanging up, I blocked his number and later changed it. I later learned that Ken couldn't manage his savings, and he was currently in a difficult situation. Ken is struggling with debt and unable to find steady work, resorting to day jobs and part-time work. As for my mother and me, we started anew elsewhere and were free from the stress related to Ken. She had been unable to visit Mary's grave due to her hospital stay and our move. It seems like she still hasn't come to terms with the fact that Mary has passed away, and she often cries looking at photos and videos of her dear friend. I want to go see Mary soon, she says sadly, so I promised we would visit the grave soon, carefully planning to avoid running into Ken. I'm focused on supporting my mother and making the most of our lives in this new place.